Are you preparing for GCE A Levels? Are you finding ways to improve your grades or studying efficiency? I'm going to share with you how I studied for my A Levels and how I was able to attain A grade for my 4 H2 plus H1 general paper subjects. If you have watched my earlier video on my education path, then you might have already known that I took biology, chemistry, mathematics, and econs. I want to start off by just mentioning that I was not always a straight A student. In fact, I actually attained D and E for general paper and econs up until the midterms in JC2, just about 6 months before A Levels. But I'll share more about how I managed to improve in that short span of time in the next video. So before I go into the specific studying methods I adopted for each subject, in this part of the video, I want to first share with you what are some of the studying habits or routines that I had while preparing for the A Levels. I found that these studying habits are really helpful for me, and I've continued to use them after A Levels. However, I do want to caution you against suddenly changing your studying habits if you are just left with a few months to the A Levels, as this might backfire on you since my method may not be suitable for you. Tip number 1. I find it really helpful to write my own summary notes for each chapter or topic, and I like to do this about 1 to 2 weeks after the teacher has finished teaching the topic. The process of trying to summarize a topic helps me to identify what are the main points of the topic, and also helps me to identify if there are any areas that I still don't understand. So I try to write these key points onto the sticky notes and paste them onto the front page of the chapter. And I find this useful for when I do my revisions for tests later on, as I can simply just read through the sticky notes to refresh my memory on the topic, and so it takes less time for me to go through every single topic, especially for the final year exams where there's so many topics being tested. In addition, it's good to always go back to the summary notes and add on to them or improve on them after every test, or as and when you realize that you have missed out certain points or misunderstood some concepts. Tip number 2. Building on to the first point on the summary notes, I think that it is always important to review every test, assignments, or practice questions that you have done. Always make sure to tag the questions that I make a mistake in, and I'll re-attempt these questions after a week just to ensure that I have understood how to answer these questions. If there are questions that I often get wrong, I'll make sure that I highlight them and prioritize reviewing these questions before every single test. So basically, just make a compilation of the questions that you make a mistake in and always reattempt to see if you have learned your mistake. It's also important that you do your corrections properly when your teacher goes through your tests or assignments so that you don't look at the wrong answers when you do your revisions. Tip number 3. Start doing past year papers and 10-year series early. I think that most schools, including mine, would ask students to purchase the 10-year series only in JC2. However, I actually bought the topical 10-year series in JC1 and started doing the questions by topic as we learn in JC1. I think that doing the topical questions is great for identifying the topics that we are weaker in, and it also allows you to start practicing with the A-level standard questions right from JC1. I think it's very beneficial to practice early on because I do observe that many people cannot finish the 10-year series because they started too late in JC2. Whereas for me, I actually attempted the topical questions before every test since JC1 and started attempting the full past year papers in about March in JC2. But if you think that it might be a waste of money to buy both the topical and the yearly 10-year series, you can also just get the yearly 10-year series in JC1 and do the questions in a full paper that you think belongs to the topics that we will learn. Or you can also try getting second-hand copies or purchase a copy with a few friends. I also had the time to do the papers from other schools, but for these papers from other schools, I typically only select the question types that look unfamiliar or questions that I thought was too difficult or had no idea how to even start. And then I will go for consultations with my teachers to go through these questions. I want to emphasize that it is really important that you have at least completed the whole 10-year series once, just so you actually can get a gauge on the type of questions that generally comes out and what are the keywords or answers that the examiners are looking for. And also, due to the time constraints, I suggest that you focus on question types that you have difficulty in, or question types that you have not attempted before. It is not very helpful if you redo the question types that you are already familiar with, as you will just be wasting time on questions that you already know how to do. Tip number 4. Having a proper time schedule for studying is important, and to make sure that you are dedicating sufficient amount of time to each subject. I don't recommend that you allocate equal amounts of time for each subject, because the amount of content for each subject is different, and I think that it is quite obvious that if you are better in some subjects, you probably need less time to study for these subjects. There are some people that divide their time in a day for multiple subjects, but in my opinion, I think that this is not very helpful, because this means that you spend very little time on each subject at one go. But for efficient learning, I think that you should be spending at least 2 to 3 hours to get deep into the subject and to absorb the content. In addition, it might be too much on your brain to have to switch to focusing on so many different subjects in one day. Hence, for me, I actually only study 2 subjects a day. I plan for studying sessions of about 3 to 4 hours before giving myself 1 to 2 hour breaks. And during these breaks, I'll try to have a power nap to give myself a mental break. I also typically don't go beyond 10 hours of studying in one day, as I find that it gets inefficient. For me, the optimal is actually about 8 hours a day. Rather than increasing the hours, being able to stay focused and studying efficiently is actually more important. In addition, I also make plans on how many topics or papers, etc. that I want to go through or complete for each day to make sure that I keep on track and will be able to finish revising all the topics before the exam day. Hence, adhering to the planned schedules is very crucial. Tip number 5. Getting into the routine before the A Levels. There is about 1 month's time between the official end of school lessons and the start of A Levels. So during this time, I try to let my body get used to the exam schedule. I'll wake up early in the morning and travel to school and start studying at the time when the morning exam would take place. I also schedule my study session for 3 hours, as that is the longest exam duration, and I make sure that I stay focused throughout the 3 hours. I'll take breaks in between and then resume my study session at the time where afternoon exams would begin. This is so that my brain can get used to functioning at these timings, and this is especially important for people who are very used to studying at night. Also, do take the time to attempt the full subject papers in one sitting without the use of any phones or notes, just like how the actual A Levels will be like, so that you can know your true standards. And the more you practice this way, the more you get used to exam settings and the less panic you will feel during the actual exam. Tip number 6. I do not revise for the subject of the exam that I am taking in the evening before the day of the exam, and in fact, I stop studying by 7 PM of the day before the exam. The reason is that I do not want to have a hard time falling asleep due to worrying about the exam or have bad quality sleep thinking about the exam. So I try to do other things instead that will make me feel more relaxed and distract me from the thought of exams. I find that having a good quality of sleep is really important to have a clear mind on the exam day. In addition, I think that studying the night before or on that day itself might give yourself more anxiety instead. I believe in studying consistently, which will help you to retain memory of the subject content better, rather than pulling all-nighters and cramming in the information last minute. But I do understand that people have different ways of coping, so just make sure that you can have a good rest before your exam day. Tip number 7. I have a pretty unique method of studying, which may not be appropriate for many people. Most people would read through the topics and study before they try doing the past year papers. However, for me, I actually do the opposite. I'll attempt the past year paper or practice questions before I even start studying. This may be surprising to some of you, but I use this to gauge my own knowledge, to know how much I'm lacking so that I can better plan out my study schedules, because otherwise I don't know what I don't know, and it is also useful in helping me to identify the topics that I'm weaker in and also some of the concepts that I may not have realized was taught. It also helps me to reinforce my memory of the content that I do not recall as I try to search for the correct answers after realizing that I lack this knowledge. So I typically split the practice questions or past year papers into two halves, where I attempt 50% before studying and leave 50% for after studying. If there is enough time, I'll reattempt the papers that I did before studying. And tip number 8. I do not study with my friends as I think that it might be more distracting if you study with someone else. Thus, I always take my own table and study alone. But I'll gather the concepts and questions that I do not understand and discuss with my friends at an agreed timing. I find that this is more efficient rather than asking my friends as and when a question pops up. I also think that it is important to have these sessions with your friends as you can help each other, especially if your stronger and weaker subjects complement each other. And this is especially helpful if you have difficulty arranging time for consultation with your teachers since your teachers have so many students. But even if you excel in every subject, I think that mentoring your peers is also a great way to help you further reinforce your knowledge of the concepts. Being able to explain clearly to your peers shows that you have a good grasp of the concept. And who knows, maybe your friend may point out questions that even you may not have thought of. In addition, if you are a visual learner and need to make concept maps or mind maps, but you don't have enough time for every chapter, you may consider working with your friend so that maybe you can do half of the chapters and your friend can do the other half, and then you guys can share the notes. But this doesn't mean that you just trust each other's notes blindly. This is a good opportunity for you and your friend to double check on your understanding while you read through each other's notes. I hope the tips that I have mentioned may be helpful for you in your studying journey. As every subject is different, do tailor your studying preparations to each subject. I'll be diving into the studying tips for individual A-level subjects that I've taken in my next videos. Thanks for watching this video. Do subscribe and keep a lookout for the upcoming videos.